Coloring your artwork can be a fun experience, and there's many ways to go about the process. But if you're not sure how you can faithfully recreate that idea you have in your head of how you want the colors to look, it can get frustrating. Let's say that you're envisioning a vibrant, colorful piece with a warm atmosphere, but the execution falls kind of flat. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing inherently bad about having simpler colors or simpler flat colors that are a foundation for the shading if you choose to incorporate that. But there are a few simple tricks that can give your colors a boost if you want to give your art that extra pop. Contrary to what you're probably thinking, there's no rocket science behind this at all. And there's a good chance that all of these things will already be in your proverbial artist toolbox. Of course, this video will focus on coloring your digital artwork. Two of these methods can be applied to traditional artwork as well, but when it comes to traditional art, there are different ways to apply these methods than what you would do if you were to color digitally. I've employed all three of the methods I will be mentioning in this artwork of the one and only Reed Arknights that you should be seeing on the screen right now if you want an example of how these tricks work in action, but I will also be using my character Talia as a recurring and more hands-on example. I don't even know if hands-on is the right word to use here, but that's the only one I can think of. These aren't all of the tricks you can use when coloring, but these are some of the simpler ones that have helped me during my art journey. There's more methods that aren't in this video that I would like to talk about later, and depending on how well this video does and if people are curious, I might make a follow-up video where I do that. So with that out of the way, if you're new here and you want to see how you can elevate your coloring skills, then make sure to like and subscribe. And if you're already subscribed, then welcome back to the spaghetti layer. Either way, strap your butts in because here we go! Let's start with a simple method to elevate your coloring skills. Gradients. In art, gradation is the technique of gradually transitioning from one hue, shade, or texture to another. Depending on the medium, artists can use a variety of methods like blending or cross-hatching to create gradients. A simple way to apply gradients in traditional drawing is applying varying levels of pressure on the paper if you're using pencils, colored pencils, or crayons, or by blending two or more colors together if you're using markers or paint. If you're drawing digitally, multiple drawing programs already have the gradient tool, namely Clip Studio Paint and Paint.net, which was my drawing program of choice once upon a time. But that time is long gone now. While, again, there is nothing wrong with having entirely flat base colors or a more simplistic coloring, using gradation can add a layer of depth to your pieces. Simply using a darker or lighter version of the base color for your gradient is a good place to start, but if you want to add an extra pop of color, you can make the gradient color warmer or cooler than the base color. For instance, since Talia has auburn hair, I can make the gradation color a darker, more reddish brown to set up the shading, and a more peachy color to set up the highlights. However, you can experiment with this depending on the vibe you want. And gradation doesn't have to be strictly for the flat colors. There are several tricks you can use involving gradation to give your highlights and shadows another layer of depth. You can use a soft eraser brush and set it to a low opacity to soften the edges of your shading, something you can also do with the gradient erase feature if you're using Clip Studio Paint. If you want more than one color for your gradients, Clip Studio Paint also allows you to lock the transparent pixels on any given layer, so you can play around with that without having to worry about cleaning up any messes. But I'm sure there are other drawing programs that have this feature. It can and sometimes will take several attempts to have your gradation be in the specific position and have the specific effect you want it to be in, but the best advice I can give here is don't overthink it. It's also worth noting that you shouldn't feel locked into making gradients using only the gradient tool. This is something that I also use the soft airbrush tool for when the situation calls for it. Usually I go for an opacity between 5 and 30%, depending on how strong I want the effect to be. And you shouldn't feel locked into using adjacent colors either. You can try pairing complementary colors like red and green, or you can mix and match different colors to see what works best for your piece. Blending modes are layer effects that will affect how the pixels on one layer blend with the colors on the lower layers. Multiple drawing programs allow for the use of blending modes such as Photoshop and Clip Studio Paint. This is, of course, the one method that's locked to digital art, since the function of digital layers isn't the same as layering your colors traditionally. Unless somebody finds a way to integrate blending modes onto sketchbook paper or something. To be honest, I have a bit of a complicated relationship with blending modes. When I was in my second year of college and took a digital coloring class, the teacher told us that if you use certain blending modes like multiply, which will multiply the colors of both the blending layer and the base layers, resulting in a darker color, it will greatly affect the final image if you choose to print it. But I don't think you're likely to encounter this problem if you convert your file to a PNG or JPEG image before printing, for example. Regardless, it admittedly scared me off from using blending modes entirely for a few years, and personally I feel like my art during that time took a hit because of that. Now you can color in artwork without using blending modes, but it's important to understand what values you need for lighting and shadows, especially when you take the atmosphere of a piece into consideration. Is this foreshadowing for the last section of this video? I can neither confirm nor deny. The multiply effect is a great blending mode to use for things like shadows, and it's my go-to blending mode for shading. But it's not the only one that you can utilize. There's an article on clipstudio.net that goes into depth on this subject, but in the interest of time I'll talk about some of my favorites, as well as ones that I've used in the past. I've linked that article in the description, so if you want to learn more about all of the other blending modes, give the article a read. You might learn a few things from that page, like I did regarding the exact specifics of how the blending modes affect the base colors. In the earlier years of my digital art experience, my go-to blending mode for shadows was a mode called Color Burn. This blending mode both darkens and increases the contrast of the colors on the base layer while blending the colors of the blending layer. This results in the affected shadows or areas being more saturated. It's also for that reason that I have since moved on from the Color Burn mode, since I'm personally not as fond of the effect it gives to my shading as I am with the Multiply mode. Another blending mode in this vein that I'm somewhat acquainted with is Linear Burn, which blends the colors of the blending layer by darkening the colors of the base layers. For highlights, I go between several different blending modes depending on the kind of effect that I want, and I don't have a strict blending mode of choice. Let's talk about the 4 blending modes that I typically use for highlights. First up is Color Dodge, which lightens the colors of the base layer and reduces its contrast, resulting in more saturated midtones. We also have the Add mode, which adds the color information of both the base and the blending layers, resulting in an increase in brightness. Then there's Glow Dodge, which produces a stronger effect than Color Dodge, and Add Glow, which is a stronger version of the Add mode. The latter two tend to produce very strong results, so I would suggest using these two wisely. But they can be great for producing a glow effect like their names imply. One way to counteract the strength of these two blending modes is by setting the blending layer to a lower opacity. In instances like these, I start out at 50% opacity and make adjustments from there. This also goes for your shadows. And one more thing I want to talk about is ambient colors and lighting, or rather colors that I use as transitions between the base colors and the shadows or highlights. There are 3 blending modes in particular that I use to achieve this effect. The first is Overlay, which makes bright areas look brighter and dark areas look darker. The other 2, Soft Light and Hard Light, depend on the intensity of the color on the blending layer. Using bright colors on the blending layer will create a brighter effect, while dark colors will create a darker effect. It's important to note that any color placed above white areas will appear white. Where the 2 blending modes diverge in terms of behavior is that the soft light brightens in a way similar to the dodge modes like Color Dodge, while it darkens similar to the burn modes like Color and Linear Burn. Hard light brightens in a way similar to the screen mode, which inverts the base colors and multiplies the colors of the blending layer, and darkens in a way similar to the multiply mode. One thing that I would also recommend while using blending modes is experimenting with the colors you use for the blending layer. Different hues, values, and saturation will affect the look of your artwork's colors, so don't hesitate in making adjustments as you see fit. So, what exactly do I mean by atmospheric coloring? Simply put, it's a matter of taking your colors and adjusting things like tone, brightness, and contrast to get the atmosphere that you want for the final piece. The hues on the color wheel can be separated into warm and cool colors. Colors like red, pink, orange, and yellow are considered warm colors, while colors like blue, purple, and green are considered cool colors. These hues can also be categorized into warm and cool tones themselves, depending on the shade of that specific hue, or how much red, green, and blue has gone into that specific color. If you're trying to capture a specific mood for a scene, then atmosphere is important. Let's say that your art depicts a rainy, overcast scene. In scenarios like these, cooler and more muted palettes typically come to mind. Warmer and brighter colors will usually lose their intensity in works that are meant to have a cooler color palette. But you always have the option to increase the intensity of a warmer color, or really any color you choose, if you want something specific for the viewer to focus on. Conversely, pieces with a warmer background will typically call for brighter and warmer base colors that are higher in contrast and saturation. To introduce another example, you may also want to use pastel colors, which involve lighter and softer colors that aren't as intense. However, for all this talk about warmer and cooler colors, there is a third option to take into account when coloring. This third option involves neutral colors, which are muted shades like white, tan, gray, brown, and black. These colors are low in saturation and intensity, and are perfect for capturing a more dreary environment or capturing a more subdued atmosphere. With all of that said though, how can you best get the atmosphere you want if you're not sure where to start? There are a few settings you can utilize to your advantage here. One tool that I like to use when adjusting the temperature of my base colors is the color balance feature, which is a color correcting feature that allows for the global adjustment of the intensities of the colors used in a piece, and allows for the adjustment of the 3 primary colors in digital art: red, green, and blue. While the color balance feature is primarily used for color correction, it can also aid in boosting color temperature. If you want the setting of your piece or the general atmosphere to be lighter or darker, then you can adjust the saturation and luminosity of your colors, as well as the brightness and contrast. Increasing these features results in a brighter, more vibrant work, while decreasing these features produces the opposite effect. I have mentioned this in a previous video, but if you want to take your artworks to print, I would caution against having the saturation and contrast of your works being too high, as this can affect how the colors look when or if you choose to print your pieces. Reference may be your bestie, but so is knowledge of the color gamut. Oh, and before I forget, if you choose to add shading to your pieces, it's important to understand which colors complement the intended atmosphere and complement the colors of the base layer. So those were just 3 of the ways you can elevate your digital coloring skills. Sorry it took this long to make a new video, but you may have noticed that I did a drawing stream 2 weeks ago. I'm not yet sure when I'll do my next one, but I will let you know when I do. Again, these aren't the only ways you can go about taking your coloring skills to the next level, so to speak. These are just some of the methods that I have the most experience with. But hopefully this video has given you some idea of where to start, and since I like the coloring process, I figured that this would be a fun video to make. Feel free to try these methods out for yourself if you haven't already, or experiment if you want to. I mean, it's art. The possibilities are endless. But anyway, that is going to do it for this video. If you like this video and you want to see more art-related videos and shenanigans from me, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. I post new videos every other Friday, usually about drawing or what have you, but sometimes I dabble in other art-related things as well. If you want to support me further, please check out my other social media accounts as well as my Ko-fi and my Etsy shop, which are all in the description. And lastly, if you made it this far, leave a tomato emoji in the comment section below. And remember to keep things civil in the comments, or I will put a whoopee cushion in your chair when you least expect it. And yeah, that's about everything. Thanks for watching.